It's no secret that immigration has been off the rails in Canada for at least the last 2 years, maybe even a few years before that. We know that Trudeau and his policies have led to a giant population spike, and Canadians are currently hurting. So we have a video today from BNN Bloomberg with one of their economists, luckily from the private sector this time, not a university one, which we've been dealing with for these last few videos. But he has some horrible takes on what I think is the issues with some of our immigration problems, what's happening with the Trudeau programs, and why we are getting the issues that we are dealing with currently. I think we can discuss what the trends are going to be for the real estate market, what's happening, and will we see a crash in 2025? What is this going to do for Canadians? Let's dive into today's video.
Well, let's get some more reaction from Royce Mendez, who's managing director and head of macro strategy at Desjardins. I mean, those numbers give us a lot to work with. What is your takeaway?
The limits the federal government is going to be placing on population growth, assuming this all materializes, is, I think, the biggest Canadian macro story that's come out recently. These are major curtailments to population growth, and reducing not only limiting the growth in temporary residents, but actually reducing the number of temporary residents has, changed our outlook for the Canadian economy. We put out a scenario just last week on how it changes GDP, it changes employment. Things are not looking as bright as they were. As I said in the last segment, the only reason we avoided a recession last year was because of strong population growth and a strong U.S. economy. And now you're removing one of those from the equation. I think every business in this country has probably benefited.
Okay, before he gets into the next point, that's hilarious for him to say something like, "Oh, well, this is such a major curtailment to the population growth." No, the major change to the population growth is 1.3 million people getting stuffed into Canada in one calendar year. That's the major change and the crazy change, because we've never had this level of immigration. And when they talk about, oh, it's such a positive impact to the GDP, we're not creating anything. We're not producing from these immigrants. It's not like they're coming over and starting productive jobs. A lot of them get into, retail jobs, or they work at fast food restaurants, or they drive Uber. It's like they're just finding the job that they can get into right away. These aren't productive roles. And I have no problem with those roles, but we have people here who can fill those roles. We don't need to bring over 1.3 million immigrants to fill those roles. So it's like, this is such a big issue to our population growth. Like, yeah, our population growth does not need 1.3 million people. That's what's the issue.
From a growing population, more people to purchase goods and services. They've also benefited from having more labor available to hire. We were
keeping wages low.
Facing some pretty severe labor shortages a couple of years ago. One of the main reasons that those have dissipated is because we've introduced so many new people who can work.
Nope. So the labor shortages we dealt with a couple of years ago was not somebody getting a job at A&W or McDonald's. What the labor shortages were people who work in the trades, construction, any sort of those like production style roles that are actually helping us build and develop as a country. And of the 1.3 million people, such a small number actually got into construction and trades. I remember seeing a number somewhere around 4,000 people got into that, but we needed, tens of thousands to fill in and backfill some of these roles. So when he talks about, we were able to deal with some of the labor shortage. No, the labor shortage is being fixed because a lot of the demand is going down, and people like demand as far as like the companies are not investing as much. There's not as much work right now because we are slowing. Canada is in a recession, but per capita GDP is staying steady. Well, if per capita GDP is staying steady and we're increasing by 1.3 million, that means we're shrinking, guys. So for them to say like, oh, the labor shortage is being fixed because we stuffed in a bunch of these people who work in these, entry-level roles, it's like, that's not the case. That they didn't fill the roles that we actually needed, the skilled labor roles.
We move forward in time. If we see these limits put in place, that's going to remove a big growth driver for the Canadian economy, and it's going to reduce the available labor pool for.
That's not a growth driver, just bringing in immigrants who aren't producing and just, taking their money. It's not a growth driver. It's very, very temporary. It's like doing drugs and being happy. you're happy for a little bit, but you did drugs.
Businesses in this country.
I just want to take a step back and, we can also share the numbers on our aging population, which got us to this conversation in the first place, right? Do we want to look like some European nations in 10 or 20 years? And so we have seen this immigration policy. And to your point, you're seeing some of the benefits. But as Heather's report highlighted, there are the complications in the short term as well. Could we have known? I mean, did we have to go through this process just to see how Canada's economy could adjust to these record population levels to kind of reach this conclusion?
Could we have known that if you exploded the population and we didn't actually increase our production, we have all of the availability to do that as Canada, but we decided to just, bring over the immigrants and then we'll let them kind of spend money and do this and we can fake keep up the economy. Could we have known if we stuffed in 1.3 million people in a year that we would have had the impact that it had? Here's the thing that's annoying. This is punishing immigrants too. This isn't just punishing Canadians. So I don't want to put this all on the immigrants as in they're to blame. We don't like immigrants. Every country needs some level of immigration, especially Canadians, because we're just straight up not having kids. So, we do need some level of immigration, but the 1.3 million is crazy. And so to be where the immigrants are getting punished is they're getting sold this dream. They're coming to Canada and they're like, it's expensive here. There's nowhere to live. They're just taking our money. We're spending. We can't get ahead. It's like, well, you're not benefiting as an immigrant. You would be better off staying home.
So we've always known that we need to introduce new people into the economy to replace the workers that are retiring and help out with the...
Why not encourage child growth?
The care economy. That being said, things got out of hand in the past couple of years with regards to temporary residents, and that's particularly people on student visas and people on work visas. Just to put this in context, last year, the Canadian economy...
So I am a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me if you want to work with me in London or if you want to work with anybody across the country of Canada. I do have a national team. We can hand select somebody in your area. But the reason I bring that up is because I'm also a real estate investor. So I own some properties. I work with other real estate investors. The amount of applications that we started to see from people who were temporary residents, international students, people just trying to get into places. They were applying with 8, 9 people for 2 and 3 bedroom units. That's not productive. That's not helpful. That's hurting them. So when he's talking about, things got out of hand, Conestoga College brought in 32,000 international students in 1 year. And that's one college in a small neighborhood in Kitchener-Waterloo area, Cambridge. And so it's how can we sustain this? And again, who's getting hurt? Of course, Canadians, but also the immigrants.
Economy saw population increase by 1.3 million. The U.S. economy, which is 10 times larger, saw population increase by 1.7 million. That is a stark contrast when you think about it in those terms. That's how fast the population was growing. So it's no surprise that...
Let that sink in for a second. A country 10 times our population, 10 times our population, got 1.7 million immigrants. We got 1.3. That's not the math you ever want to see. So when I hear him saying things like Canada's going to suffer from less immigration, well, maybe that's the Band-Aid that we have to pull to fix these things.
That a housing market that was already struggling pre-pandemic to keep up with demand has been absolutely decimated in terms of affordability after seeing this surge in population growth. And that's why policymakers had to do something to address this. They were trying to do things on the supply side for the housing market. Those are more long-term in nature answers to these problems. The shortest term answer is to curtail population growth.
You always need both. You need supply and limited immigration. In this case, we cannot outbuild the amount of immigrants that are coming over, especially since none of them get into construction or trade. So they're not even helping us build. They're just wanting places without helping produce the places.
So just a final question on housing, but to lead up to it, I feel like you've outlined that we have grown through policy. We've had growing pains through policy. Policy is evolving to address those growing pains, and then that raises new questions about our growth as a result. But then on the housing front itself, because you have other considerations like the interest rate environment, you've joined us on a number of occasions, your concerns about the mortgage renewal process over the next couple of years. So add this update to what's going on with interest rate policy. What do you see in the cards for the housing market?
I think 2024 might be a bit of a mirage. So you might start to see policymakers talk about rate cuts or eventually begin cutting rates this year, and maybe you will see a pop in the housing market. It's 2025 where things begin to get really worrisome. Number one is because you'll see the impacts of these limits on population growth. So the demand for housing won't be growing anywhere near as fast as it has over the past 12 months.
Can I just jump in and ask, is that a bigger issue to think about than interest rates going down by 50 or 75 basis points?
Okay, so to bring it up as like, oh, the housing market's really going to suffer because the demand's falling from the 1.3. I've been a real estate agent for years. I've been a real estate investor for years. Canadian prices in the real estate market have been going up for almost 30 years now, even with, the correction in the early 90s, as well as the 2008 financial crisis. The market has always gone up. Slower in some years, and maybe the couple year average, and maybe it was a little bit flat, but it's traditionally always gone up. And that was with very realistic immigration numbers. We're already behind from the millions and millions of people we've already brought in. So to say that we need millions to keep the prices going up, no, we don't need to see the prices going up at the rate that they were going up. Even if it was flat for a few years, for us to just catch up and, Canadians to feel like they're not getting completely locked out of the market because prices keep going up and going up. It'd be so much better because then people wouldn't have to worry about, wage inflation in the same way just to keep up with the house prices and all these things. If we could just keep it flat, keep it steady, keep it healthy. That's the kind of market that we need and would be productive for Canada versus like, no, prices are really going to suffer because we don't have 1.3 million. And again, the cuts that they're doing are so minimal. It's going to be such a small, I guarantee you we're still going to end up with 700,000, which before the 1.3 would be like record making years. It's like, yeah, guys, it's not 1.3, but it's still going to be 700,000.
Big wild card is how much these mortgage renewals matter. If people are really struggling to make these mortgage payments, even if interest rates come down, we've shown on this show that the payment shocks for people are still large. They'll be paying a lot more because they took out mortgages in 2020 and 2021 where rates were basically at zero and you were getting mortgage rates of 1.5%, 2%. Yeah. You're going to have mortgage rates much higher than that probably in 25. That's the problem. And if people are really struggling, then the housing market is going to be under a lot of pressure next year because you're not going to have the population growth to continue to fuel that upward momentum.
Couple pieces of good news for what he's saying. So yes, I've always said 2025 is going to be the year that I'm slightly concerned about as well, because that's when people did have lower mortgage rates and the biggest gap would be on their interest rate. However, 2020 wasn't that crazy price-wise. It wasn't until we got into that 2021, kind of early 2022 when it peaked. That's when stuff got really crazy. We did see increases in 2020, of course. But the good news is they would have 5 years of pay down. They wouldn't have bought at crazy peaks. And he said 1.5%, 2%, I think, in this video. I don't know if I saw anybody with a 1.5% mortgage. Definitely in the twos. That became pretty common. But, the good news is I think we're going to start seeing some cuts towards the end of this year, which depending on how the bond market starts to plan their cuts for 2025, we might be able to get rates in the 4s or something like that. So it's like if or even high 3s depending on how low they go on the fixed. And it's like if that's the case, hopefully they can minimize the rate shock. And then again, like it's not like they're cutting immigration to zero. Like all of these economists act as if like, yeah, immigration zero. It's still not going to be way higher than the traditional trend. It's just going to be 25% of what it was is going to be cut off. And it's like, yeah, guys, we can deal with that. So anyways, that's it for today's video. I just wanted to predict some of this stuff. And the reason I think it's important to know is obviously the Trudeau government uses the immigrants as a voter base because traditionally, this is of course not everybody, but traditionally immigrants do vote Liberal. So knowing that this was kind of being abused for the last few years at the expense of immigrants and Canadians, I'm actually glad that we're seeing this. If the real estate market sits a little flat, that's okay. And reach out to me in the link below if you do want to work with me as a real estate agent. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.